Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jacob Whitmore, but folks around here just call me Jake. I've been a ranger in the George Washington National Forest for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, cave-ins, you name it. My grandfather worked these same ridges, and my father before me. We're mountain people, born and raised in the shadow of the Blue Ridge. I never believed in the old stories. You know the ones, holler spirits, mountain ghosts, things that live in the deep caves where sunlight never reaches. My grandmother used to tell tales about the Cherokee spirits called Nunahai, immortal beings who lived inside the mountains themselves. They're not evil, she'd whisper, but they're not human either, and they remember everything. Pure nonsense, I always thought. Until October of 1973. The weather had been strange that fall. Fog rolled in thick and stayed for days, even when the barometric pressure said it should clear. Temperatures dropped 20 degrees overnight with no warning. The animals were acting wrong too. Deer bunched together in open meadows instead of hiding in the woods, and the birds went quiet for hours at a time. I was patrolling the Devil's Backbone Ridge system when the call came in. 3 college kids from Virginia Tech had gone missing in the Whispering Cave system. They were geology students, experienced cavers who knew what they were doing. Their names were Sarah, Marcus, and David. Good kids, according to their professor, smart kids who followed safety protocols. They'd been missing for 48 hours. I knew Whispering Cave well, or thought I did. It's a limestone system about 3 miles off the main trail, nothing too dangerous for experienced spelunkers. The Cherokee used to say it was sacred ground, a place where the mountain spirits gathered to sing. That's how it got its name. The wind through the rock formations sounds almost like voices sometimes. When I reached the cave entrance that morning, I found their equipment scattered around like they'd dropped everything and run. Ropes, headlamps, climbing gear, all abandoned. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The ropes weren't frayed or broken. They were cut. Clean, straight cuts like someone had sliced through them with a knife. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the cave. Nothing. I pulled out my grandfather's old compass, the same one he'd used to navigate these mountains for 30 years. The needle spun in wild circles, unable to find magnetic north. It pointed toward the cave entrance, then swung away, then back again, like something inside was pulling at it. The forest around the cave was dead silent. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling the leaves. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. I radioed back to headquarters. "This is Ranger Whitmore. I'm at the Whispering Cave site. Something's not right here." Static crackled back at me, getting louder as I moved closer to the cave entrance. My radio had never acted up before, but now it sounded like a broken television trying to find a signal. The cave mouth was bigger than I remembered, an 8-foot limestone arch that disappeared into darkness. There were symbols carved into the rock around the entrance, weathered smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Cherokee markings, probably, or maybe something older. I strapped on my gear and checked my equipment twice. 3 flashlights, extra batteries, emergency flares, first aid kit, and 200 feet of climbing rope. Standard cave rescue gear. I'd done this dozens of times before. At 2:47 p.m. I entered Whispering Cave to find those missing students. I had no idea I was walking into something that would change me forever. The main passage sloped down at a gentle angle, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness ahead, showing limestone walls worn smooth by underground streams. The air was cool, about 55 degrees, normal for a cave this deep. About 200 feet in, the passage split into 3 tunnels. I found Sarah's headlamp at the junction, lying on the rocky floor like someone had just set it down. The lens was cracked, and when I checked the batteries, they were completely drained. fresh batteries according to the date stamped on the side. I picked up the broken headlamp and called out, "Sarah, Marcus, David, this is Ranger Whitmore. Can you hear me?" My voice echoed down all 3 passages, but something was wrong with the echoes. They came back distorted, like my words were being twisted by the rock itself. I could swear I heard them bounce back in a different language, something that sounded like Cherokee, but older somehow. I chose the middle passage, following a faint trail of scuff marks on the cave floor. The tunnel narrowed as it went deeper, forcing me to duck in places. My breath came out in small puffs of vapor, even though caves are supposed to stay the same temperature year-round. That's when I noticed my flashlight getting dimmer. I tapped it a few times, thinking maybe I hadn't screwed the battery cap on tight. But the beam kept fading, like something was draining the power right out of it. I switched to my backup light and kept going. 50 feet further, I found blood. Not much. Just a few drops on a limestone formation that jutted out from the wall. Human blood, still red and wet. It led deeper into the cave, drop by drop, like someone had been bleeding while they walked. The temperature kept dropping. My breath turned into thick clouds and I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket. Caves don't get this cold. They can't. The earth itself keeps them warm. I followed the blood trail around a sharp bend and found myself in a wider chamber, maybe 20 feet across. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above my head, and there, carved into the far wall, were more of those strange symbols. But these weren't weathered like the ones outside. These looked fresh, like someone had been carving them recently. The lines were deep and sharp, cut into solid limestone with impossible precision. No human tool could make marks like that. That's when I heard the humming. It was faint at first, like a sound carried on wind from far away. But there was no wind in the cave. The humming seemed to come from the walls themselves, a low, wordless tune that made my teeth ache. Not quite music, not quite voices, but something in between. My second flashlight started to dim. I fumbled for my third light, cursing under my breath. The humming got louder, and I could feel it in my chest now, like a bass note played too loud. The sound seemed to be coming from deeper in the cave system, from passages I couldn't even see. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone down there? This is Park Service. I'm here to help." The humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It pressed against my eardrums like deep water, making me dizzy. I stood there in the growing darkness, listening to my own heartbeat, and realized I couldn't remember which way I'd come from. All the passages looked the same now. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and dance in my failing flashlight beam. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, I could hear something moving. Not footsteps. Something else. Like rock grinding against rock, slow and deliberate. I clicked on my third flashlight and prayed it would last long enough to find those students. The beam was already weak, casting pale circles of light that barely reached 10 feet ahead. That's when I saw the scratches on the walls. Fresh gouges in the limestone, running parallel, level to the floor like claw marks. But these weren't made by any animal I knew. They were too deep, too precise, and they followed the passages like someone or something had been marking its territory. The blood trail led deeper into the mountain, and I had no choice but to follow it. Behind me, in the darkness I'd left, the humming started again. The passage opened into another chamber, this one much larger than the first. My dying flashlight couldn't reach the walls or ceiling, but I could feel the space around me, vast and hollow, like standing inside a cathedral made of stone. That's where I found Marcus. He was sitting against the far wall, knees pulled up to his chest, staring straight ahead with eyes that didn't blink. At first I thought he was dead. Then I got closer and saw his chest moving up and down, slow and steady, like he was sleeping with his eyes open. "Marcus?" I knelt down beside him, shining my light on his face. "Marcus, can you hear me? I'm here to get you out." He turned his head toward me, and I nearly dropped my flashlight. His eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, from corner to corner, like someone had filled them with ink. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice wasn't his own. "The keeper is waiting," Marcus said in a flat, emotionless tone. "The keeper has been waiting so long." "What keeper?" "Marcus, where are Sarah and David? What happened to you?" "The mountain remembers," he continued, still in that strange, hollow voice. "The mountain needs to remember. We help it remember now." I grabbed his shoulders and shook him gently. His skin was cold as cave stone, and when I looked closer, I could see something wrong with it. Tiny crystals were growing under his flesh, making patterns like frost on a window. The crystals glowed faintly in the darkness, giving off a soft, blue-green light. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "What did this to you?" Marcus smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. "The keeper loves us. The keeper keeps us safe. We are part of the mountain, and now—" A sound echoed through the chamber, that grinding rock-on-rock noise I'd heard earlier. It was getting closer, coming from one of the side passages. I helped Marcus to his feet, but he didn't want to move. He kept pulling toward the sound like it was calling to him. "We have to go," I told him. "Right now." That's when I heard Sarah's voice, calling from somewhere deeper in the cave system. "Help me!" she cried, her voice weak and frightened. "Please, someone help me. I can't move." I looked at Marcus, whose black eyes stared back at me without recognition. The grinding sound was getting louder, accompanied now by a rhythmic tapping like footsteps on stone. Big footsteps. I had to choose. Try to carry Marcus out or find Sarah and David first. "Stay here," I told Marcus, though I wasn't sure he understood me anymore. "I'll come back for you." I followed Sarah's voice deeper into the cave, my flashlight barely a candle now. The batteries were almost gone, but I could see a faint glow ahead. The same blue-green light that had been under Marcus's skin. The passage opened into the largest chamber yet, and what I saw there will haunt me until the day I die. Sarah was there, but she wasn't Sarah anymore. She was growing into the wall itself, her body half merged with the limestone like she was becoming part of the cave. Mineral deposits covered her arms and chest, but her face was still human, still conscious, still terrified. "Help me," she whispered when she saw me. "I've been here so long. It won't let me go. It wants me to stay forever." David was in the far corner, standing perfectly still with the same black eyes as Marcus. But David was talking. Not to me, but to something I couldn't see. He spoke in that ancient-sounding language I'd heard in the echoes, his voice rising and falling like he was chanting a prayer. The chamber was lit by hundreds of those, glowing crystals, growing from the walls and ceiling in spiral patterns. They pulsed with a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat made of light. And in the center of the chamber, where all the crystal patterns converged, something was moving. At first, I thought it was just a formation of rock and mineral. Then it turned toward me, and I realized it was alive. The keeper was 8 feet tall and made of living limestone with bones and crystals woven through its body like veins. Its face was almost human, but too long, too narrow, with eyes that glowed the same blue-green as the crystals. When it moved, pieces of the cave floor moved with it, like it was connected to the mountain itself. "Welcome, Jacob Whitmore," the keeper said in a voice like grinding stone. "I have been waiting for you. The mountain told me you would come." My flashlight finally died, leaving us in the crystal glow. I fumbled for one of my emergency flares, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the ignition. "What have you done to them?" I asked. "I have given them purpose," the keeper replied. "They are part of the mountain's memory now. They will remember everything, every season, every storm, every creature that has walked these ridges. They will live forever." The flare burst to life, casting wild red light across the chamber. The keeper didn't flinch from the brightness, but Sarah cried out in pain. The light was hurting her somehow. "Let them go," I said, though I knew it was pointless. "I cannot let them go," the keeper said, taking a step closer. "The mountain needs to remember. Humans forget too quickly. They die, and their memories die with them. But here, in my keeping, they remember forever. Behind me, I could hear Marcus entering the chamber, his footsteps slow and shuffling. David had stopped chanting and was walking toward me with that unnatural smile. I was surrounded, and my flare wouldn't last much longer. The keeper extended one hand toward me, a hand made of living stone and bone. Join them, Jacob Whitmore. Join the mountain's memory. I can take away your pain, your loneliness, your fear of death. You will never have to hurt again. For a moment, I almost considered it. The offer was tempting. No more nightmares about my brother's death in that cave-in. No more empty house. No more wondering what the point of it all was. Then I heard Sarah whisper, "Don't let it take you too." That snapped me back to reality. These were kids, college students with their whole lives ahead of them. And this thing, whatever it was, had stolen their futures to feed its own ancient hunger. I held up the flare like a weapon. "No." The keeper's glowing eyes narrowed. "Then you will leave, and you will forget. The mountain will make you forget." But I wasn't leaving without a fight. The keeper raised its stone hand, and the cave itself responded. The walls began to move, flowing like water, closing off the passages behind me. I was trapped in the crystal chamber with this thing and what was left of the 3 students. "You cannot fight the mountain," the keeper said. "The mountain is eternal. Your people built their cities and roads, but the mountain remembers when this land was young. It remembers the ice, the great waters, the first people who worshipped in these caves." As it spoke, I could see the truth of what had happened here. The Cherokee had known about the keeper. That's why they called these caves sacred. They'd made some kind of deal with it, bringing offerings in exchange for the mountain's protection. But when the Cherokee were forced out, the offerings stopped coming. The keeper had been alone for over a century, growing hungry for human consciousness, human memory. "The first people understood," the keeper continued. "They brought me stories, songs, the memories of their ancestors. I kept them safe in the heart of the mountain. But then they were gone, and I was alone with only the stones to talk to." David and Marcus were moving closer, their black eyes reflecting the flare light. Sarah struggled against the limestone that held her, but she couldn't break free. The crystal formations were growing faster now, spreading across the chamber floor toward my feet. I backed against the wall, holding the flare high. "Let them go, and I'll bring you other people, volunteers, people who want to live forever." The keeper tilted its head, considering. "You lie, Jacob Whitmore. I can taste your thoughts. You would bring soldiers, scientists, people who want to study me and cage me, people who do not understand what I offer." The stone wall behind me began to soften, reaching out like fingers to grab my arms. I jerked away, but there was nowhere to run. The chamber was shrinking, the ceiling lowering, everything closing in. That's when I remembered what my grandmother used to say about the Cherokee spirits. They're not evil, but they're not human either. And they remember everything. Everything, including their weaknesses. I looked up at the crystal formations on the ceiling, pulsing with that rhythmic light. They were beautiful, intricate, and probably took centuries to grow. The keeper's entire domain was built on those crystal networks, its power, its connection to the mountain, its ability to transform people. "You know what I remember?" I said, pulling out a second flare. "I remember my grandfather telling me about cave-ins, how sometimes you have to bring down part of the mountain to save the rest." The keeper's eyes flashed brighter. "You would not dare. You would kill them all." "Maybe," I said, igniting the second flare. "Or maybe I'd set them free." Sarah's voice was stronger now, more like herself. "Do it, Ranger, please. We're already dead. Don't let it spread." I looked at David and Marcus, still approaching with their black eyes and crystal-covered skin. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of their real selves behind the keeper's influence, a desperate plea for release. "The explosives," Marcus whispered in his real voice, fighting against the keeper's control. "In my pack, cave survey charges." "Of course. Geology students would have small explosive charges for testing rock formations. I'd seen the equipment at the cave entrance, but hadn't thought about what it was for. The keeper realized what was happening and lunged toward me, its stone body flowing across the chamber floor like an avalanche. I threw both flares at the largest crystal formation on the ceiling and rolled toward the passage where Marcus had entered. His backpack was there, forgotten in the shadows. I fumbled through it while the keeper roared behind me, a sound like a mountain splitting apart. The crystal formations were cracking from the flare heat, their light flickering and dimming. I found the survey charges, small but powerful, designed to fracture rock for core samples, enough to bring down this chamber and maybe seal the keeper inside. "No!" the keeper screamed, its voice shaking dust from the ceiling. "The mountain needs to remember." "The mountain will remember," I said, arming the charges, "but it doesn't need you to do it." I threw the explosives toward the largest cluster of crystals and ran for the passage. Behind me, Sarah called out, "Thank you," in her own voice, clear and human. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The crystal formations shattered, their light going out like candles in a hurricane. The keeper's roar cut off abruptly, replaced by the grinding sound of tons of limestone crashing down. I ran through the collapsing passages as the mountain shook around me. Rocks fell like rain, and dust filled the air so thick I could barely breathe. My compass spun wildly, then suddenly snapped to point north. The magnetic anomaly was gone. Behind me, deeper in the mountain, I could hear the keeper calling out in that ancient language, its voice growing fainter as the cave system sealed itself off. I climbed over fallen rocks and squaws, eased through gaps that were closing even as I passed through them. The mountain was healing itself, sealing the wound I'd made, but it was letting me escape. Maybe the mountain was tired of the keeper, too. Maybe it was ready to remember things on its own. I emerged from a cave entrance I'd never seen before, 2 miles from where I'd entered. The fog had lifted, and the sun was setting over the ridge. My radio crackled to life with normal static, no more interference. I was alive. I was free. But I wasn't unchanged. The official report said the 3 students died in a cave-in caused by unstable limestone formations. Natural rockfall, according to the Geological Survey. The entrance to Whispering Cave was completely sealed, over 100 tons of rock blocking any access to the deeper chambers. I never told anyone what really happened down there, but the mountain remembers, even if I sometimes wish I could forget. It's been 3 months since that October day, and I've transferred to a different section of the forest. Can't bring myself to patrol the Devil's Backbone anymore. Every time I see limestone formations or hear wind echoing through rocks, I remember the keeper's voice, the crystal light, and the look in Sarah's eyes when she thanked me for setting her free. I've developed a tremor in my left hand. Stress, the doctor says. Sometimes I catch myself speaking words in a language I don't recognize, words that sound like the Cherokee prayers my grandmother used to whisper. The other rangers think I'm dealing with survivor's guilt, and maybe they're right. But late at night, when the wind picks up and whistles through the mountain passes, I can still hear it. That low humming that comes from deep underground. The sound of something ancient and patient, waiting for the right moment to start collecting memories again. I've started keeping a journal, writing down everything I remember about that day in the cave, not for any official record, but because I have the feeling that someone needs to remember the truth. Someone needs to know what's sleeping use, and or the mountain, in case it ever finds a way out. Last week I got a call from a ranger station in Tennessee. 3 hikers had gone missing near a cave system in the Smoky Mountains. They found the hikers' equipment at the cave mouth. Ropes cut clean, no signs of a struggle, and strange symbols carved into the rock around the entrance. The local rangers said their compasses wouldn't work near the cave. I didn't tell them what I knew. How could I? But I did make some calls, had the cave entrance sealed for safety reasons. Sometimes prevention is the only cure. The mountain spirits are patient. They've been here longer than our cities, longer than our roads, longer than our understanding of what's possible and what's not. The Cherokee knew this. That's why they made their offerings, kept their bargains, treated the mountains with the respect that old things deserve. We forgot those lessons. We thought we could take what we wanted from the mountains without giving anything back. But the mountains remember everything, and eventually they collect what they're owed. I still carry my grandfather's compass, and it points true north now. But sometimes, when I'm patrolling near limestone caves or deep hollows where the mist hangs thick between the trees, the needle will twitch just a little, like it's trying to point towards something that shouldn't be there. Those are the places I stay away from now. Those are the places where something is still listening, still waiting, still humming old songs in the darkness beneath the earth. My name is Jacob Whitmore, and I've been a ranger in these mountains for 15 years. I used to think I knew everything there was to know about this job, about these hills, about what was real and what was just old stories told to scare children. Now I know better. The mountains are older than we are, and they have longer memories. And sometimes, if you listen carefully on a quiet night when the wind is just right, you can hear them singing to themselves ancient songs about the way things used to be and the way they might be again. I hope I never have to find out what those songs really mean. But I have the feeling that someday someone will. The mountain always collects what it's owed, and we've been borrowing from it for a very long time. My name is Michael Stonecrow, but everyone just calls me Mike. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. It was May 1987 when I first got assigned to the Mount Craig area in Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Parkway section was my beat. Miles of thick forest, rocky peaks, and streams so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet down. I loved this job. Always had, ever since I got my environmental science degree and decided I'd rather protect nature than sit behind some desk in the city. At 38, I was lean from hiking these trails every day, and my eyes had turned this intense green that my ex-wife used to say looked like the forest itself. I always carried my field notebook, filled it with everything from rare plant sightings to weather patterns. Details mattered in this job. Sometimes they were the difference between life and death. The mountains were different in 1987. There was this mining boom happening, companies coming in with big promises about jobs and money. The whole area felt tense, like a storm was building. People in the nearby towns were split right down the middle. Half wanted the work, half wanted to keep the mountains untouched. That's where I came in. My job was to assess the environmental impact of these mining proposals, especially the big one from Black Rock Mining Corporation. They wanted to strip mine 500 acres on Mount Craig's eastern face. 500 acres of old-growth forest, gone. Just like that. I'd been walking these mountains for years, documenting every species of plant and animal, every watershed, every delicate balance that kept the ecosystem alive. And now some corporation in fancy suits wanted to tear it all up for coal. The weather that spring was strange, too. Late storms kept rolling in, and we were getting seismic readings that didn't match any known fault lines. The geology department kept issuing landslide warnings, but the patterns were weird. Random, like the mountain was shifting. My first real hint that something was wrong came during a routine survey. I was with a team from Black Rock showing them around the proposed mining site. There was this guy named Peterson, nice enough fellow, had kids back in Tennessee. We were measuring tree diameters when this sound started. It was low at first, like distant thunder, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Peterson looked up at me with this confused expression, and that's when the ground started to shake. Not an earthquake. I'd felt those before out west. This was different, focused, like something big was moving underneath us, following us as we walked. The shaking stopped the moment we left the mining boundary. Probably just some underground water shifting, Peterson said, but his voice was shaky. I wrote it down in my notebook anyway. Details matter. That night I called my old geology professor at NC State, described what we'd felt. He was quiet for a long time, then said something that stuck with me. Mike, sometimes the earth has a memory, and sometimes it gets angry when you try to mess with places that are supposed to stay untouched. I thought he was being poetic. Turned out, he was being literal. The next morning, I got a call from my supervisor. Peterson was dead. They found him at the bottom of a rock slide on Mount Craig, about a mile from where we'd been surveying. The strange thing was, there was no reason for those rocks to fall. No rain, no seismic activity, no signs of erosion. The rocks just fell. Standing there at the accident site, looking at the scattered boulders and the yellow tape, I felt something I'd never experienced in 13 years of ranger work. The forest was watching me. Every tree, every shadow, every whisper of wind through the leaves, all of it focused on me, measuring me, deciding something about me. I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 1, something is very wrong here. I had no idea how wrong things were about to get. The accidents started happening every few days after that, always to BlackRock employees, always on or near the proposed mining site. First, it was equipment failure. Survey instruments that worked perfectly fine everywhere else would go haywire the moment they crossed into the mining boundary. GPS units would spin wildly, compasses would point in different directions, and electronic levels would show impossible readings. Then came the injuries. A bulldozer operator named Jenkins was clearing a small access road when his machine just died. Engine seized up completely, no warning, no mechanical reason. When he got out to check, a tree branch fell and broke his arm. A healthy branch from a healthy tree on a day with no wind. I started spending more time on Mount Craig, trying to document what was happening. My job was to assess environmental impact, but I was starting to think the environment was assessing us right back. The forest felt different up there, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Animals would go completely quiet when BlackRock crews showed up, then return to normal the moment they left. I'd been around wildlife my whole career. This wasn't natural behavior. 3 weeks after Peterson died, I was hiking alone near the summit when I heard it for the first time. Singing. Human voices, but distant, like they were coming from deep underground. The language wasn't English. It had this rhythmic, chanting quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. I followed the sound for about an hour, but it always seemed to stay just ahead of me, just around the next ridge. When the sun started setting, it stopped completely. The silence that followed was so total I could hear my own heartbeat. That night, I called my old friend, Jim Crow Feather. He was Cherokee, worked as a cultural consultant for the Park Service. If anyone would know about that singing, it would be him. Mike, he said when I described what I'd heard, you need to be very careful up there. Mount Craig isn't just a mountain to my people. It's sacred ground, burial ground. The old ones rest there, and they don't like being disturbed. Come on, Jim. You know I respect your culture, but I'm not talking about respect, he cut me off. I'm talking about survival. There are places in these mountains where the boundary between our world and the spirit world is thin. Mount Craig is one of them. And if BlackRock is planning to strip mine that area... He didn't finish the sentence, but I could hear the worry in his voice. The next morning I found all of BlackRock's equipment at the base camp destroyed. Not vandalized, destroyed. A bulldozer was flipped completely upside down. A truck was embedded 3 feet into solid rock like something incredibly strong had just pushed it there. No tire tracks, no footprints, no signs of machinery that could have done this. The strangest part was the trees. Overnight, a perfect circle of oak trees had died around the equipment, just brown and withered, like they'd been dead for months. But I'd walked through that same grove the day before, and every tree had been healthy and green. BlackRock brought in security after that. Night watchmen, cameras, the whole setup. It didn't help. The first night guard was found the next morning sitting in his truck, staring straight ahead. Conscious, breathing, but completely unresponsive. The paramedics said it was like he'd seen something so terrifying his mind just shut down to protect itself. He never spoke again. The second night guard lasted 3 hours. He called his supervisor at 2 a.m., screaming about warriors in the trees and the mountain is moving. When the backup team arrived, they found his equipment scattered across a 100-yard area and the guard himself huddled behind a rock, muttering in what sounded like Cherokee. He didn't speak Cherokee. Never had. I was starting to realize this wasn't just about environmental protection anymore. Something old and powerful was waking up on Mount Craig, and it was angry. The final straw came when I was interviewing the surviving BlackRock workers. Most of them were too scared to go back up the mountain, but a few were stubborn enough to keep trying. One of them, a survey team leader named Rodriguez, pulled me aside. "Ranger Stonecrow," he said, glancing around to make sure nobody else could hear. "I've worked construction for 20 years. I've seen equipment fail. I've seen accidents. I've even seen people crack under pressure. But what's happening up there? That's not normal." "What exactly did you see?" He was quiet for a long moment, then looked me right in the eye. "Yesterday, I saw a man standing on the ridge above us, Native American, wearing traditional clothes but see-through, like looking through colored glass. He was pointing at us, and I swear I could hear him speaking even though he had to be half a mile away. And when he finished talking, every single piece of equipment we had just died, all at once." That night, I lay awake thinking about what Jim Crow Feather had said, about boundaries between worlds, about sacred ground and old ones who didn't like being disturbed. I was a man of science. I believed in facts, in data, in things I could measure and document. But 13 years in the wilderness had taught me that there were mysteries in these mountains that science couldn't explain. And I was starting to think that Mount Craig was one of them. By the end of June, 3 more BlackRock employees were dead and 5 were in the hospital. The company was hemorrhaging money, but they weren't backing down. If anything, they were getting more aggressive. The CEO, a man named Harrison Blackwood, flew in from corporate headquarters. I met him at the base camp. Expensive suit, expensive watch. The kind of man who thought money could solve any problem. He looked at the destroyed equipment and dead trees like they were minor inconveniences. "Ranger Stonecrow," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was trying to prove something. "I understand you're the environmental assessor for this project." "That's right. Good, because we need this assessment completed quickly. We've got investors breathing down our necks and protesters making us look bad in the media. How soon can you sign off on our permit?" I stared at him. "Mr. Blackwood, have you seen what's been happening up here? Your workers are dying. Accidents happen in industrial work. We factor that into our insurance costs. These aren't accidents." He gave me this condescending smile. "Ranger, I respect that you love trees and animals, but this is a business decision. We're talking about jobs for this community, tax revenue for the state, coal for American energy independence. A few unfortunate incidents don't outweigh those benefits." That's when I knew I wasn't just fighting for the environment anymore. I was fighting against people who saw the mountain as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The attacks escalated after Blackwood's visit. Whatever was protecting Mount Craig seemed to take his presence as a declaration of war. The first major incident happened during a survey expedition I was required to accompany. We were a team of 8, me, 4 BlackRock surveyors, 2 security guards, and a company photographer documenting the environmental cooperation for their PR department. We'd barely made it half a mile up the trail when the forest went completely silent. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. No birds, no insects, no wind through the leaves. Even our footsteps seemed muffled. One of the security guards, a big man named Torres, raised his hand for us too. "Oh, stop. Something's wrong," he whispered. That's when we heard the drumming. Deep, rhythmic beats that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. The sound vibrated through our chests, and I felt the ground trembling under our feet. "We should go back," I said. Blackwood's head surveyor, a stubborn man named Kellerman, shook his head. "We have a job to do. Keep moving." The drumming got louder as we climbed higher, and then we started seeing them, figures moving through the trees. At first I thought they were other hikers, but as we got closer I realized they were translucent. Native American warriors in traditional dress, keeping pace with us, watching us. "You guys seeing this?" Torres asked, his voice tight with fear. We were all seeing it. 8 rational adults staring at what could only be described as ghosts. The photographer was snapping pictures frantically. "This is incredible," he kept saying. "This is going to be front-page news." But when he developed the film later, every single frame was blank. Not overexposed or underexposed, completely empty, like the camera had been loaded with clear plastic instead of film. We made it to the proposed mining site before things really went wrong. The moment Kellerman started setting up his survey equipment, the ground beneath us began to crack. Not earthquake cracks, perfect geometric lines forming a pattern that looked almost like writing. The ghost warriors stepped out of the trees. There had to be 30 of them, forming a circle around us. They weren't threatening exactly, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. One of them, wearing what looked like a chief's headdress, stepped forward and spoke. I couldn't understand the words, but somehow I knew what he was saying. This land is sacred. Leave now, or face the consequences. Kellerman, being either very brave or very stupid, ignored the warning and continued setting up his equipment. That's when the mountain decided it had been patient long enough. The crack in the ground opened wider, and something that might have been steam but foul, like breath, rose up from the depths. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and the ghost warriors began to glow with this eerie blue light. Then the trees started moving, not swaying in wind, actually uprooting themselves and walking. Ancient oaks and maples pulling their roots from the soil and repositioning themselves to block our path back down the mountain. Torres and the other security guard were backing away, hands on their weapons, but smart enough to know bullets wouldn't help. The photographer had stopped taking pictures and was just staring in shock. Kellerman was still trying to use his equipment, even though it was sparking and smoking. The chief raised his hand, and every electronic device we had, GPS units, radios, cameras, even our watches, died completely. We were cut off from the outside world. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about protecting a mountain. This was about protecting a people's connection to their ancestors, their history, their sacred places. And these spirits weren't going to let anyone destroy that connection, no matter what it cost. I stepped forward, pulling out my field notebook. "Chief," I said, hoping he could understand English, "I'm not here to hurt this place. I'm here to protect it." He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt like he was reading my soul. Then he nodded once and spoke a single word in Cherokee. The trees stopped moving. The warriors faded back into the forest. The ground stopped shaking, but Kellerman, stubborn to the end, chose that moment to turn on his surveying equipment. The machine let out a high-pitched whine, sparked once, and exploded. The explosion knocked all of us backward. When the smoke cleared, Kellerman was gone. Not dead, gone. We searched for hours, but it was like he had just vanished from the face of the earth. That night, camped at the base of the mountain, I wrote in my notebook, "Day 42, the mountain is fighting back, and it's winning." I was starting to realize I might have to pick a side in this war, and it might not be the side that paid my salary. The morning after Kellerman disappeared, I got a call from my supervisor ordering me back to headquarters. BlackRock was demanding my removal from the project, claiming I was interfering with legitimate business operations. They wanted a new assessor, someone who would rubber stamp their permit without asking uncomfortable questions. I knew I had maybe 48 hours before they replaced me. 48 hours to document everything I'd seen and find a way to protect Mount Craig permanently. That's when I decided to go back up the mountain alone. I left my radio in the truck. I'd learned that electronics were useless up there anyway. Just me, my notebook, and a growing certainty that I was about to meet whatever was really protecting this place. I found him at sunrise, sitting on a rock outcrop near the summit. Not translucent like the other spirits I'd seen, but solid, real, casting an actual shadow in the early morning light. He was ancient. I could feel the weight of centuries in his presence. His skin was weathered like old leather, his hair white as snow, his eyes holding wisdom and pain in equal measure. When he spoke, I understood every word, even though he was speaking Cherokee. "You are the one who protects the green-growing things," he said. It wasn't a question. "I try to," I answered. "My name is Michael Stonecrow." He smiled at that. Stonecrow. A good name for one who stands between the earth and sky. "I am Atsila Skanitsi. In your tongue, Fire Mountain. I have guarded this sacred place for 300 years. You're what's been stopping the mining." The mining is only the latest wound they would inflict. First came the settlers with their axes and plows, then the loggers with their saws. Now the miners with their machines that tear the very bones from the earth. His expression hardened. Each time I drove them away. Each time I returned with greater numbers and larger machines. I sat down on a nearby rock, pulling out my notebook. The people buried here, they're your responsibility. My people, my children, my warriors who fell defending these mountains from those who would take everything and leave nothing. He gestured to the forest around us. Their spirits rest in every tree, every stone, every stream. To destroy this place is to destroy them forever. But you're killing innocent people. Fire Mountain's eyes flashed with something that might have been pain or anger. Innocent. They come with machines of destruction. They would poison the water, kill the trees, scatter the bones of my ancestors like dust. In what way are they innocent? I thought about Peterson, about Kellerman, about all the Black Rock workers who'd been hurt or killed. They weren't evil men. They were just trying to make a living, support their families. But they were also part of a system that saw sacred places as obstacles to profit. There has to be another way, I said. Perhaps. He studied me carefully. You feel the mountain's pain. You hear its voice. Few of your people can do this. As he spoke, I started to understand something that had been building in me for weeks. The strange sensations, the way I could predict when accidents were about to happen, the dreams filled with Cherokee voices. I was becoming connected to this place in ways I didn't fully comprehend. The mountain is changing you, Fire Mountain continued, opening your eyes to truths your people have forgotten. You can become a bridge between our worlds. What do you want from me? Help me save this place, not with violence, but with your laws. Your people respect papers with official seals. Find a way to make them understand this land cannot be touched. I thought about my field notebooks, filled with documentation of rare species and sensitive ecosystems, about federal regulations protecting Native American burial sites, about environmental impact studies that could stop projects like this if someone cared enough to do them right. I can try, I said, but BlackRock has a lot of money and political influence. They're not going to give up easily. Fire Mountain stood, and for a moment he seemed to grow taller, more imposing. Then we will give them a reason to fear this mountain more than they love their profit. That afternoon, as I hiked back down to write my report, the mountain's revenge reached its climax. Harrison Blackwood had returned with a full crew and enough equipment to start preliminary mining operations immediately. They'd set up a massive base camp with generators, prefab buildings, and heavy machinery. Dozens of workers were clearing trees and preparing access roads. I was still half a mile away when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black with clouds that seemed to boil up from the mountain itself. Lightning struck with surgical precision, targeting only the mining equipment. Thunder crashed so loud I felt it in my bones. But it wasn't just a storm. As the wind picked up, I could see figures in the lightning, Cherokee warriors riding the storm itself, their war cries mixing with the thunder. The trees began to fight back. 100-year-old oaks uprooted themselves and flung their massive trunks at the bulldozers. Vines grew at impossible speed, wrapping around machines and crushing them like tin cans. The ground split open in a dozen places, swallowing equipment and forcing the workers to flee. And from every crack in the earth came that otherworldly singing I'd heard before, but louder now, more urgent, like a battle song. Fire Mountain appeared in the center of the chaos, no longer the wise old man I'd spoken with that morning. Now he was a force of nature itself, 10 feet tall, blazing with spiritual fire, his voice shaking the very foundations of the mountain. "Leave this sacred place!" he roared in perfect English, his words carrying on the wind to every corner of the base camp. "Disturb the sleep of the ancestors no more." Most of the workers ran. The smart ones kept running until they reached their cars and drove away from the mountain as fast as they could. But Blackwood and a few of his most loyal employees tried to ride out the storm, taking shelter in a reinforced trailer. That's when Fire Mountain showed them what centuries of anger looked like. A bolt of lightning struck the trailer directly. When the flash faded, Harrison Blackwood was standing in the doorway, but he wasn't the same man. His expensive suit was untouched, but his eyes were empty, completely blank, like no one was home inside his head anymore. He walked to the center of the destroyed base camp, knelt down, and began speaking in Cherokee. Words he couldn't possibly know, describing the sacred nature of the land and formally withdrawing BlackRock's mining proposal. The storm ended as suddenly as it had begun. The ghost warriors faded back into the trees. Fire Mountain looked at me one last time, nodded with satisfaction, and disappeared. I found Blackwood still kneeling in the mud, still speaking Cherokee, tears streaming down his face. When the paramedics arrived, they said he was in some kind of trance state. He never recovered. Last I heard, he was in a psychiatric facility, spending his days drawing pictures of Cherokee burial grounds and refusing to speak English. My report to the Park Service was the most thorough environmental assessment I'd ever written. I documented 17 endangered plant species, 6 sensitive watershed areas, and most importantly, clear evidence of Native American burial sites throughout the proposed mining area. Federal law prohibited any development that would disturb those sites. BlackRock Mining Corporation withdrew their proposal 3 days later and never returned. To North Carolina. Mount Craig was designated as a protected cultural preserve 6 months later. The Cherokee Nation worked with the Park Service to establish it as a sacred site, off limits to commercial development forever. I testified before the Federal Commission making that decision. I told them about the rare ecosystems, the sensitive watersheds, the archaeological evidence. I didn't mention the spirits, or the supernatural storms, or the way the mountain had spoken to me in dreams. Some truths are too big for official reports. The ordeal changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I retired from the Park Service on medical disability, post-traumatic stress they called it. But it wasn't trauma that ended my career. It was transformation. I can still hear the mountain's voice sometimes, in quiet moments when the wind is just right. Not just Mount Craig, but other sacred places throughout the Appalachians. They speak to me about threats and changes, about old spirits awakening and ancient promises that need to be kept. I became a consultant after leaving the Park Service, helping environmental groups document sacred sites and fight development projects. Not all of them have supernatural protectors like Fire Mountain, so they need human advocates instead. Jim Crow Feather says I've become what his people call a bridge walker. Someone who moves between the physical and spiritual worlds, translating the needs of each to the other. It's a responsibility I never asked for, but can't refuse. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. He was dealing with strange accidents at a proposed resort development near an old Cherokee settlement. Equipment failures, worker injuries, electronic devices going haywire. The patterns were familiar. I'm driving up there next week. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just signed off on BlackRock's permit, collected my paycheck, and minded my own business. Would Fire Mountain have found another way to protect his sacred ground? Would innocent workers have died in escalating supernatural attacks? I'll never know for sure, but I sleep better believing I made the right choice. The mountains remember everything, every promise made and broken, every sacred site protected and destroyed. Every person who stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to look the away. And sometimes, if you know how to listen, they'll tell you their secrets. My name is Michael Stonecrow, and I've learned that there are some places in this world that are worth more than money, more valuable than the resources we can extract from them. Places where the boundary between our world and something older, something deeper, something sacred becomes so thin you can step across it without even realizing you've crossed over. Mount Craig is one of those places, and Fire Mountain is still up there, watching over his ancestors, protecting ground that has been sacred for longer than our civilization has existed. He's waiting for the next threat, the next group of people who think profit matters more than promises, the next corporation that sees sacred land as just another resource to be exploited. When they come, and they will come, because that's what we do as a species, he'll be ready for them. And if I'm still alive, I'll be ready too. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight changes you forever. even if the mountain claims you as its own. My name is William McAllister, but everyone just calls me Bill. I've been a forest ranger for 18 years now, ever since I got back from Vietnam in '64. Started as a fire lookout, worked my way up to law enforcement. The Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky became my home, and I thought I knew every tree, every creek, every hidden spot where trouble might be brewing. I was wrong. It was July 1982, hot and sticky like only Kentucky summers can be. The morning mist hung heavy in the valleys, making everything look ghostly and strange. I'd been getting reports for 2 weeks about something happening deep in the Red River Gorge area. Not normal ranger business either. This was the kind of stuff that made my boss scratch his head and wish he could pass it off to someone else. 3 moonshine operations had been destroyed, not raided by cops or torn up by rival families like you might expect. Destroyed. Like something had gone completely crazy and ripped everything apart. The copper stills were twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. Wooden buildings were smashed to splinters, and the people running these stills, well, they were dead. Now, I've seen my share of violence. Vietnam taught me what humans can do to each other when they're angry or scared. But this was different. The bodies looked like they'd been mauled by something huge. Something with claws longer than my fingers and strength that could snap a man's spine like a twig. At first, everyone figured it was a family feud. Mountain people have been making moonshine in these hills since before my grandfather was born. Sometimes rival families fight over territory. Sometimes they fight over customers. But the families involved swore they had nothing to do with it. The Combs family, the Hatchers, the Brewers, they all said the same thing. Something was hunting them. Something that wasn't human. I'm not Tim, the kind of man who believes in ghost stories. 18 years in these woods, and the scariest thing I'd ever seen was a black bear with cubs. Bears can be dangerous, sure, but they don't usually go around destroying moonshine operations. They might get into your garbage or tear up your campsite looking for food, but they don't have the brains or the anger to systematically destroy 3 different illegal operations in 2 weeks. But somebody had to investigate, and that somebody was me. The first site I visited was what was left of the Brewers' operation. It sat in a hollow about 5 miles from the nearest road, hidden behind a wall of rhododendron bushes. Or it used to sit there. Now it looked like a tornado had touched down in that one specific spot. The still itself was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. These old copper pots are built to last. They're solid, heavy, made to handle heat and pressure. But this one looked like it had been grabbed by giant hands and twisted until it broke. The metal was actually torn, not cut or broken from impact. Torn, like someone had ripped it apart with their bare hands. Even stranger were the claw marks. They were carved deep into the oak trees around the clearing, starting about 7 feet off the ground and going up another 3 feet. I've seen bear claws before. These weren't bear claws. They were too long, too deep, and spaced too far apart. Whatever made them was bigger than any bear I'd ever heard of. Tom Brewer, the youngest of the family and the only one who survived, was staying with his cousin in town. When I went to talk to him, his hands shook every time he tried to light a cigarette. His eyes kept darting to the windows like he expected something to come crashing through. It wasn't natural, he kept saying. It moved like a man but looked like the devil himself, big as a truck and twice as mean. My daddy and uncle tried to fight it off, but it just... He couldn't finish the sentence. "What did it look like, Tom?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Like a bear, but wrong somehow. It walked, on 2 legs sometimes, 4 legs other times. Its eyes," he shuddered, "its eyes looked smart, like it was thinking, like it knew exactly what it was doing." I wrote down everything he said, but I'll admit I didn't believe half of it. Traumatic events can mess with your memory, make you see things that weren't really there. I figured Tom had seen something, maybe a really big bear or even a person in some kind of disguise, but his fear had made it seem more than it was. That was before I found the footprints. They were in the soft mud near what used to be the Hatcher family's still, pressed deep into the earth like whatever made them weighed more than any animal I knew. The shape was almost human, but stretched out and wrong. 5 toes, but with long claw marks extending from each one. The foot itself was easily 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. I made plaster casts of the clearest prints and sent them to a wildlife expert at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Sarah Mills had helped me identify animal tracks before, usually when we needed to know if livestock killings were from coyotes or wild dogs. She called me back 3 days later, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. "Bill, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like these prints. They're not from any animal I can identify. The size is wrong, the shape is wrong, and the depth suggests something that weighs at least 600 pounds. But the foot structure," she paused, "it's almost human. Like someone took a human foot and stretched it out, made it bigger and stronger." "Any chance it could be fake?" I asked. "Maybe someone trying to scare people?" "The depth and weight distribution are too consistent. These were made by something real, something heavy, something that walks on these feet regularly. Bill, I don't know what made these tracks, but it's not anything in my textbooks." That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and tried to make sense of everything I'd seen. 3 destroyed moonshine operations. Bodies torn apart by something with incredible strength. Footprints that didn't match any known animal. And witnesses who swore they'd seen something that walked like a man but looked like a monster. Part of me wanted to call in federal backup, maybe get some experts from Atlanta to take a look. But another part of me, the part that had learned to trust my instincts in Vietnam, told me this was something I needed to handle myself, at least until I understood what I was dealing with. The moon was just a thin sliver that night, barely giving any light. As I sat there in the darkness, listening to the normal sounds of the forest, I made a decision. I was going to find out what was happening in my woods, no matter how strange or dangerous it might be. I just had no idea how strange and dangerous it was going to get. The next morning, I loaded my truck with everything I thought I might need. My service revolver, of course, plus a rifle in case I ran into something bigger than I expected. Night vision scope, camera, first aid kit, and enough food and water for 3 days in the woods. If something was really out there, I was going to find it. But first, I needed to talk to someone who knew these mountains better than anyone else alive. Ezra Combs was 93 years old and had been making moonshine since before it was illegal. His family had been in these hills for 6 generations, and Ezra knew every story, every legend, every secret that the mountains held. He lived in a cabin so far back in the woods that most people weren't even sure it existed. Finding Ezra's place took me most of the morning. The trail, if you could call it a trail, wound through thick forest and over ridges that didn't show up on any map. But I'd been the before, usually when someone reported seeing smoke where no smoke should be. Ezra was sitting on his porch when I arrived, almost like he'd been expecting me. He was a small man, barely, 5.5 feet tall, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Those eyes had seen almost a century of life in these mountains. "Morning, Ranger Bill," he said, not seeming surprised to see me. "I reckon you're here about the troubles." "What troubles, Ezra?" I asked, settling into the chair he offered. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the forest like he was seeing something I couldn't see. "The old things are waking up," he finally said. "Things that have been sleeping for a long time. My granddaddy told me stories and his granddaddy told him, but I never thought I'd live to see them come true." "What kind of stories?" Ezra got up and went inside his cabin. He came back with a jar of clear liquid, his finest moonshine, and poured 2 glasses. "The Cherokee used to live in these parts, you know, before the white folks came and drove them out. They had stories about a guardian, something that protected the deep woods from anyone who would harm them." I sipped the moonshine, feeling it burn down my throat. "What kind of guardian?" "They called it different names. Forest Walker, Shadow Bear. The one I remember best was Clifty Devil, because it was supposed to live somewhere around the gorge. Story goes it was a Cherokee warrior who made a deal with the spirits. He would protect the mountains forever, but the cost was his human form." "Ezra, I need facts, not folklore." The old man's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "Boy, I've lived in these mountains longer than you've been alive. I've seen things that would make your hair turn white. Just because something sounds like a story doesn't mean it isn't true." He leaned forward in his chair. 3 weeks ago, something came to my nephew Danny's place. Danny runs a small operation about 10 miles from here, just enough to make ends meet. This thing, this creature, it walked right into it. It was clearing like it owned the place. What did it look like? Like nothing God ever made. Big as a grizzly bear, but walking on 2 legs most of the time. Covered in dark fur, but not quite black. More like the color of shadows. And its eyes... Ezra shook his head. Its eyes looked human, sad and angry at the same time. Did it hurt Danny? That's the strange part. Danny said it looked at his still, looked at him, and then just walked away. Didn't touch anything. Didn't hurt anyone. Just left. But the next day, the Brewers got hit. Day after that, the Hatchers. Day after that, Danny packed up his operation and moved it somewhere else. I finished my moonshine and set the glass down. Ezra, do you believe this creature is real? I believe something is killing people in my mountains, he said. I believe that something is big and strong and smart. Smart enough to know the difference between people who belong here and people who don't. Smart enough to know who's just trying to make a living and who's trying to get rich. What's that supposed to mean? The operations that got hit, they were all new, run by outsiders or locals working with outsiders. City folks who came in with fancy equipment and big plans. They weren't mountain people. They didn't understand the old ways, the old agreements. I thought about that as I walked back to my truck. The Brewers had been working with some investors from Louisville. The Hatchers had brought in new copper stills from Tennessee. Even the third operation, run by the Neely family, had been expanding, trying to increase production to sell to distributors in Ohio. But that was just coincidence, wasn't it? I drove to the site of the Neely operation, the most recent attack. It was in a narrow valley between 2 ridges, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look, or unless you could track the smell of mash and wood smoke. Yeah. The destruction here was even worse than at the other sites. The still house had been completely demolished, like something had grabbed it and shaken it until it fell apart. But what caught my attention were the metal parts, pipes, fittings, the still itself. They were all twisted and bent, but not randomly. They were arranged in patterns, almost like symbols. I took pictures of everything, then started looking for tracks. The ground here was softer, and I found several clear footprints. They were the same as the ones I'd found before, huge, almost human, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite explain. Following the tracks led me away from the clearing and into the thick forest. They were easy to follow at first because whatever made them was heavy enough to leave deep impressions even in hard ground. But after about a quarter mile, they just stopped. Not like the creature had jumped or climbed a tree. They just ended, like whatever made them had simply disappeared. I spent the rest of the day searching the area, looking for any sign of where the tracks might have continued. I found broken branches high up in the trees, claw marks on bark, even what looked like tufts of dark hair caught on thorns. But no more footprints. As the sun started to set, I realized I'd been walking in circles for hours. The forest around me looked the same in every direction, thick, green, and somehow watching. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings and head back to the truck. The needle spun wildly, never settling on any direction. I tried my radio, static. For the first time since I'd started this investigation, I felt something I hadn't felt since Vietnam. I felt hunted. The walk back to my truck took twice as long as it should have, even though I was moving fast and staying alert. Every shadow seemed to hide something watching me. Every sound made me jump and reach for my gun. By the time I found the logging road where I'd parked, my shirt was soaked with sweat and my hands were shaking. But I made it out. That night, I sat in my cabin and went through all the pictures I'd taken, all the notes I'd made, all the evidence I'd gathered. It painted a picture I didn't want to believe. Something was living in the deep woods around Red River Gorge. Something big, smart, and territorial. Something that could disappear without a trace and seemed to know the difference between locals and outsiders. something that was getting bolder and more violent. And tomorrow, I was going back to find it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twisted metal symbols and felt those invisible eyes watching me from the forest. By 5 a.m., I gave up trying to rest and started preparing for what I knew would be a dangerous day. This time, I wasn't going alone. Jake Morrison had been my partner for 3 years, ever since he transferred from the Forest Service office in Tennessee. He was younger than me, maybe 35, but he'd grown up hunting in the Smokies and knew how to move quietly through the woods. More importantly, he was the kind of man you wanted watching your back when things got scary. "You sure about this, Bill?" Jake asked as we loaded our gear into his truck. "Maybe we should call in the state police, get some backup." "And tell them what? That we're hunting a monster that might not exist? They'd laugh us out of the county." I checked my rifle one more time. Besides, if this thing is real, I don't want a bunch of city cops stumbling around my woods making noise and scaring it away. We drove to a different area this time, a place where I'd heard rumors of another moonshine operation. If this creature was really targeting illegal stills, maybe we could get there before it struck and see what we were dealing with. The operation belonged to the Mullins family, set up in a hidden valley about 15 miles from the other attack sites. Bobby Mullins met us at a crossroads just before dawn, his face serious as full and worried. "I appreciate you boys coming out," he said. "After what happened to the others, well, we're all pretty spooked." "How long have you been running this operation, Bobby?" I asked. "About 6 months. Nothing big, just enough to supplement the farm income. My granddaddy used to have a still in these same hills back in the 30s. He paused. "But this feels different somehow. The animals are acting strange. Birds don't sing as much. Even the insects seem quieter." Jake and I followed Bobby up a steep trail that wound between massive oak trees and thick undergrowth. The forest felt different here, older somehow. The trees were bigger, the shadows deeper, and the air itself seemed heavier. The still was set up in a natural clearing beside a small creek, hidden by the canopy overhead and thick walls of rhododendron. It was a clean operation. Newer copper pot, good fire control, proper drainage. Bobby knew what he was doing. "We'll set up watch positions," I told him. "Jake will take the high ground on that ridge. I'll position myself across the creek. If anything comes into this clearing, we'll see it." Bobby nodded. "What if it's really as big as people say? Then we'll find out what bullets can do to it." We spent the day in position, watching and waiting. Nothing happened. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Even the normal sounds, birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing, seemed muted. As evening approached, I started to think we were wasting our time. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual like normal cooling after sunset. It was sudden, like someone had opened a giant refrigerator. My breath started misting, and frost actually formed on the metal parts of my rifle. Jake's voice crackled through the radio. "Bill, you feeling this cold front?" "Yeah, keep your eyes open." The creek stopped flowing. Not slowly, not gradually. It just stopped. The water sat perfectly still, like glass. In the distance, something howled. Not a wolf or coyote howl. This was deeper, longer, and somehow sadder. Bobby came out of his high, ding spot near the still, looking around nervously. "Maybe we should get out of here," he called. That's when I saw it. It came out of the tree line on the far side of the clearing, moving so quietly I barely heard its footsteps. In the fading light, it looked like a shadow that had decided to take shape, easily 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, moving sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. But it was the eyes that made my blood turn cold. They glowed with a soft greenish light, and they looked smart. Not animal smart, human smart. Maybe smarter than human. The creature walked directly to the still and began examining it, running its massive hands over the copper and smelling the mash. Then it looked up, straight at Bobby, and I swear I saw it shake its head. Bobby started backing away slowly. "Easy there, big fellow. No trouble here." The creature tilted its head, almost like it was listening. Then it did something that made my hands shake so bad I nearly dropped my rifle. It spoke. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but it was definitely speech. Organized sounds with rhythm and meaning. The words seemed to come from deep in its chest, like distant thunder. Bobby understood something in those sounds because he nodded and started dismantling his operation, not destroying it, carefully taking it apart, like he was storing it for later use. The creature watched him work, then turned and looked directly at my hiding spot across the creek. Those glowing eyes met mine, and for just a moment, I felt like it was looking into my soul. Then it nodded once, almost politely, and melted back into the forest. The whole encounter lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Jake came down from his ridge, his face pale. "Did you see that thing talk?" "Yeah." "What did it say?" "I don't know, but Bobby seemed to understand it." We found Bobby finishing, the last of his cleanup, moving fast but not panicked. When he saw us, he managed a shaky smile. "Well, that was something," he said. "My granddaddy always said the old stories were true, but I never believed him until now." "What did it say to you?" I asked. It wasn't speaking English, but somehow I knew what it meant. It said the mountains are under protection, and small operations by mountain families are acceptable, but large commercial operations are not welcome. Bobby shook his head. It also said government men are coming and everyone needs to be careful. Government men? That's what I heard. Federal agents, maybe? I don't know, but it seemed worried about them. Jake and I looked at each other. We hadn't called in any federal help, but that didn't mean someone else hadn't. As we helped Bobby load his equipment, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The creature hadn't been violent or threatening. It had been almost polite, like it was enforcing rules rather than hunting prey. But those other moonshine operations, the ones where people had died. "Bobby," I said, "the other operations that got attacked, were they different from yours somehow?" "Oh yeah. They were big commercial setups trying to produce hundreds of gallons a week. And they were working with outside money, city investors. The brewers alone were planning to clear-cut 10 acres of old-growth forest to expand their operation." That was the piece I'd been missing. This creature wasn't randomly attacking moonshine operations. It was protecting the forest from industrial-scale operations that would damage the environment. But that raised an even more disturbing question. If federal agents were really coming, and this creature saw them as a threat to its territory, what would happen when they encountered each other? As we drove back toward town, Jake asked the question I'd been dreading. "Bill, what are we going to put in our report?" I thought about that for a long time. How do you report an encounter with something that shouldn't exist? How do you explain that a legend, dairy creature might be the most effective environmental protection agent the forest has ever had? "We're going to report that we investigated reports of unusual animal activity and found no immediate threat to public safety," I finally said. "That's not the whole truth." "No, it's not, but it might be the only way to keep that creature alive long enough to figure out what it really is and what it wants." What I didn't tell Jake was that I'd already made up my mind. Whatever that creature was, wherever it came from, it belonged in these mountains more than any of us did. And if federal agents were really coming to hunt it down, they were going to have to go through me first. 3 days later, they showed up. I was in my office catching up on paperwork when I heard the helicopters. 2 black choppers came in low over the tree line and landed in the parking lot behind the ranger station. Men in suits climbed out, followed by soldiers in combat gear. The lead suit introduced himself as Agent Frank Coleman, ATF. He was a big man with cold eyes and the kind of smile that never reached past his teeth, the kind of man who was used to getting his way. "Ranger McAllister, we need to talk." They'd taken over the conference room within 10 minutes, spreading maps and photos across the table. Coleman sat across from me while 2 other agents stood by the door. The soldiers waited outside, but I could see them through the window, checking their weapons and equipment. "We understand you've been investigating some illegal alcohol operations in this area," Coleman said. "That's correct, part of my job. And you've filed reports about unusual animal activity in connection with these operations." I hadn't filed any such reports, which meant they'd been watching us somehow. "Where did you get that information?" Coleman smiled that cold smile. We have sources. The question is, what exactly have you seen out there? I thought about the creature standing in Bobby's clearing, the way it had nodded at me before disappearing into the forest. Nothing that would interest federal agents. Let me be more specific, Ranger. We have satellite footage of something large moving through these woods. We have audio recordings of vocalizations that don't match any known animal. And we have witness statements describing encounters with an unknown creature. He leaned forward. What we don't have is cooperation from the local law enforcement. That's where you come in. What do you want from me? We want you to guide a special operations team to the creature's location so we can neutralize it. Neutralize it? Kill it, Ranger. We're going to hunt this thing down and eliminate it before it becomes a bigger problem. I felt my jaw clench. On what authority? Coleman pulled out a folder and spread photos across the table. They showed the destroyed moonshine operations, but also something else: military vehicles, sophisticated equipment, and men in hazmat suits collecting samples. This creature has killed 6 people in the last month, he said. It poses a clear threat to public safety. We have authority to take any necessary action to protect American citizens. Those people were engaged in illegal activities. That doesn't give some monster the right to execute them. His voice was getting harder. We also have reason to believe this creature may not be entirely natural. There are certain characteristics that suggest possible biological warfare applications. That's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't about protecting people or stopping a dangerous animal. This was about capturing something they thought they could use as a weapon. I won't help you hunt down an animal that's just defending its territory. Coleman's smile disappeared completely. This isn't a request, Ranger. We have federal authority here, and you're going to cooperate whether you want to or not. The only question is whether you help us willingly or arrest. Before I could answer, Jake burst through the conference room door. Bill, we've got a problem. Bobby Mullins called. Says there are military trucks heading toward his family's land, and they're not stopping to talk. Coleman was already reaching for his radio. Alpha Team, report status. Sir, we have visual contact with the target. It's bigger than we expected. Requesting permission to engage. Permission granted. Use tranquilizer rounds first, lethal force if necessary. I was on my feet before Coleman finished talking. You can't do this. That creature hasn't threatened anyone who wasn't destroying the forest. Sit down, Ranger. Instead, I headed for the door. Coleman nodded to his agents, and they grabbed my arms. Let me go. You're under arrest for interfering with a federal operation. That's when the shooting started. It came from the direction of Bobby's Valley. Rapid automatic weapon fire, followed by screaming. Coleman's radio exploded with panicked voices. Alpha Team, report! It's not going down! The tranks aren't working! Switch to live rounds! More gunfire, then a sound that made my blood freeze. The same howling I'd heard in Bobby's clearing, but louder, angrier, and closer. Alpha Team, respond! Sir, we have multiple casualties. This thing is... Oh God, it's coming right at us. The radio went silent. Coleman's face had gone white. He looked at his remaining agents, then back at me. You know this thing. You know how to track it. Let me go, and we'll talk. He nodded to his men, and they released my arms. What are we dealing with, Ranger? Something that's been protecting these mountains for longer than you can imagine. Something you've just made very, very angry. Through the window, I could see smoke rising from the direction of Bobby's Valley. In the distance, that howling sound came again, closer than before. How do we stop it? You don't, I said. You get your people out of these woods before it stops you. Coleman was reaching for his radio when the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Outside, I could hear the soldiers shouting orders, preparing defenses around the helicopter. Then I heard something that made my heart sink. The sound of metal tearing like a giant can opener working on the helicopters. It's here, Jake whispered. Coleman drew his sidearm and moved toward the window. What he saw there made him stagger backward. The creature stood in the middle of the parking lot, easily 9 feet tall in the emergency lighting. It had torn the door off one helicopter and was systematically destroying the other. But it wasn't acting like a wild animal. Its movements were precise, calculated. It was disabling the aircraft to prevent escape. Then it looked up at our window, and those glowing eyes met Coleman's. The federal agent raised his gun, but I knocked his arm aside. "Don't. You'll only make it worse." "Make it worse? That thing just killed my entire Alpha team. Because you came here to capture it. Because you threatened its territory." I moved toward the door. "Stay here. All of you. Let me try to talk to it." "You can't talk to that thing. Watch me." I walked outside slowly, keeping my hands visible and making no sudden movements. The creature watched me approach, its massive head tilted slightly to one side. When I was about 20 feet away, it spoke in that same deep, rumbling language I'd heard before. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. It was asking a question. "I know you can understand me," I said quietly. "These men came here to hunt you, to capture you. I tried to stop them." The creature studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. It spoke again, and this time I caught familiar sounds mixed in with the strange language, Cherokee words that Ezra had taught me. "Mountain, protect, old agreement." "I understand," I said, "but they'll send more men, bigger guns. You can't fight them all." The creature moved closer, close enough that I could smell the forest scent that clung to its fur. When it spoke again, its voice was different, sadder, more human. "Government men, break everything, take sacred places, must stop. There has to be another way." It shook its massive head. "No other way. Mountain spirits say, time for old guardian to sleep. But first, one more protection." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What do you mean?" The creature looked back toward the valley where the soldiers had been killed, then at the destroyed helicopters, then at me. "Tell story," it said. "Tell true story. Let people know. Mountains have protector." Before I could respond, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness with impossible silence. Behind me, I heard Coleman and his agents finally working up the courage to come outside. "Where did it go?" Coleman demanded. "Home," I said. "It went home." But I had a terrible feeling that wasn't entirely true. They found the bodies of Alpha Team 3 days later, scattered through a mile of forest. 12 trained soldiers, armed with the latest military equipment, killed by something that left claw marks in trees 20 feet off the ground. The official report blamed the deaths on a coordinated moonshiner attack. The destroyed helicopters were written off as mechanical failure. The creature was never mentioned in any government document, but the killings stopped. 2 weeks after the federal raid, I took early retirement. 30 years old, they said. Time to let younger men handle the job. They offered me a desk position in Frankfurt, shuffling papers and staying far away from the deep woods. I turned it down. Instead, I moved to a small cabin in the hills of eastern Kentucky, about 50 miles from Red River Gorge. Far enough from the action to avoid attention, close enough to keep an eye on things. Jake visits sometimes, bringing news from the Forest Service. The moonshine operations have started up again, but they're smaller now, family-based, respectful of the old ways. No one talks about the creature anymore, at least not officially. But the mountain people know. They tell their children the old stories with new details. They leave small offerings at certain places in the forest, tobacco, corn liquor, sometimes just a handful of wildflowers. The Cherokee legends have mixed with local folklore, creating something new, but somehow familiar. The forest has a guardian, they say. Something that watches over the mountains and protects them from those who would do harm. But you have to respect the old agreements, the old ways. Take only what you need, give back more than you take, and remember that some things are more important than money. Sometimes on nights when the moon is dark and the mist hangs heavy in the valleys, I sit on my porch and listen to the forest. Once in a while I hear it, That deep, rumbling voice speaking words in a language older than English, older than Cherokee, older than any human tongue. The creature is still out there, still watching, still protecting. But it's changed, just like the mountains have changed. It's adapted to a world of helicopters and automatic weapons, of federal agents and satellite surveillance. It's learned that sometimes the old ways of protection aren't enough. Last month, a mining company applied for permits to strip mine a section of the Daniel Boone National Forest. The application was denied due to environmental concerns. The company appealed, bringing in lawyers and lobbyists and promises of jobs for local workers. 2 nights later, their survey equipment was found destroyed. The metal had been twisted into those same strange symbols I'd seen at the moonshine operations. But this time, there were no bodies, no violence. Just a clear message that some things are not for sale. The mining company withdrew their application the next day. I never filed a fiat. Now I'll report about what happened in Red River Gorge that summer. How do you explain something like that in official language? How do you document an encounter with a legend that turned out to be real? But I did write down the true story, all of it, every detail I could remember. I sealed it in an envelope and gave it to Ezra Combs with instructions to give it to someone he trusts when the time is right. Ezra died last winter at the age of 94, but his grandson Bobby still visits my cabin sometimes. He brings news from the mountains in mason jars of the finest moonshine in Kentucky. We sit on the porch and talk about the old days, the old ways, and the old agreements that still bind us all. Do you ever see it anymore? Bobby asked me just last week. Sometimes, I said. Usually just a shadow moving between the trees or tracks that disappear after a few yards. But I know it's there. Do you think it's still the same creature? The one from the Cherokee legends? I thought about that question for a long time, sipping moonshine and watching the sun set over the hills I once patrolled as a younger man. I think it's whatever the mountains need it to be, I finally said. Guardian, protector, keeper of the old agreements. The form doesn't matter as much as the purpose. Bobby nodded. My granddaddy always said the land chooses its own prot. My name is David Miners, but everyone just calls me Dave. I've been a ranger here in the Jefferson National Forest for 16 years now, and before that I spent 12 years working coal mines just like my daddy did. People ask me why I made the switch, and I always tell them it was because I wanted to protect people instead of putting them in danger. That's mostly true, but it's not the whole story. The real reason I became a ranger was because of what happened to my father in 1959. He died in a mine collapse at the old Blackwater operation, along with 6 other good men. I was supposed to be working that shift with him, but I'd come down with the flu. Sometimes I think about how different things might have been if I hadn't gotten sick that day. Now I'm 43, and I still wake up some mornings expecting to taste coal dust in my mouth. It never really leaves you, that black powder. Gets under your fingernails, in your lungs, becomes part of who you are. Even after all these years as a ranger, I still cough like a miner, and my hands still carry those dark stains that won't wash clean. It's December 15th, 1975, and we're getting hit with the worst blizzard West Virginia has seen in 20 years. The snow started yesterday afternoon and hasn't let up. By my count, we've got nearly 2 feet on the ground already, with more coming. The wind is howling through the mountains like a living thing, and the temperature dropped to 15 below zero around midnight. I was sitting in the ranger station, updating incident reports and trying to stay warm, when the phone rang. It was Sheriff Coleman from Tucker County, and he sounded worried. Dave, I've got a problem. 3 high school kids went missing yesterday, and their parents just called it in. Last anyone saw them, they were heading up toward the old Blackwater mine site with some kind of video camera. My stomach, Doctor. Opt. The Blackwater mine? Sheriff, that place has been sealed up for 12 years. Yeah, well, apparently the seals don't mean much to teenagers. Their parents say they were making some kind of movie project for school. You know how kids are these days with their cameras and such. I knew the Blackwater mine better than I wanted to. It was where my father died, where 47 good men lost their lives when the main shaft collapsed. The company sealed it up tight after that. But over the years, vandals and weather had broken through some of the barriers. I'd been meaning to check on it more regularly, but the place gave me the creeps. Old miners don't like going back to sites where men died. It's bad luck. "What are their names?" I asked, already reaching for my winter gear. "Tommy Brennan, Sarah Mitchell, and Jake Torres, all 17, all seniors at Tucker County High. Their parents say they left yesterday morning around 10, said they'd be back by dinner. When they didn't show up, the families figured they were just being teenagers. But with this storm..." "I understand, Sheriff. I'll head up there right now and take a look." "Dave, you be careful. This storm's only getting worse, and if those kids are trapped somewhere..." "I'll find them," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, staring at my equipment bag. I hadn't been down in a mine since I became a ranger, but I still kept all my old gear. The mining helmet with the carbide lamp, the ropes, the oxygen meter, everything a man needs to go underground and, hopefully, come back up again. The drive up to Blackwater took 40 minutes in good weather. In this blizzard, it took me nearly 2 hours, and I had to use chains on all 4 tires. The old mining road was barely passable, covered in drifting snow that came up past my headlights. By the time I ached the mine site, the wind was so strong I could barely open my truck door. The Blackwater mine sat on the side of Laurel Mountain like a wound that never healed. Strip mining had torn away the topsoil in huge terraces, leaving behind a landscape that looked like the surface of an alien world. The main mine entrance was supposed to be sealed with concrete and steel, but I could see even from a distance that someone had been working at it with crowbars and hammers. Near the entrance, I found their truck, a beat-up Ford pickup that belonged to Tommy Brennan's older brother. It was already half buried in snow, which told me the kids had been here since early yesterday, maybe longer. I put on my mining helmet and fired up the carbide lamp. The flame burned steady and bright, casting dancing shadows on the snow around me. I could see footprints leading from the truck to the mine entrance, but the storm had nearly filled them in. At the mouth of the mine, I found the first real evidence. Someone had definitely broken through the concrete seal. Chunks of it lay scattered in the snow, and I could see sledgehammer marks on what remained. The steel grating had been pried open just wide enough for teenagers to squeeze through. More importantly, I found a rope system. 3 climbing ropes, properly anchored to steel supports just inside the entrance. These kids had come prepared, which was both good and bad news. Good because it meant they weren't completely reckless. Bad because it meant they'd planned to go deep. I tested my radio, but as expected, I couldn't reach the ranger station from inside the mountain. I'd be on my own until I got back to the surface. I left a note on their truck explaining where I'd gone, then squeezed through the broken seal and into the darkness below. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Every mine has its own scent. Coal dust, damp rock, machine oil, and something else that's hard to describe. The smell of men working hard in dark places. But the Blackwater mine smelled different. There was something sour underneath it all, and something that reminded me of standing water and decay. The main tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, following a coal seam that ran deep into the mountain. The teenagers' ropes were well placed, anchored every 50 feet or so. Whoever had set this up knew what they were doing. That worried me more than if they'd been careless. Careful people go deeper. As I followed their route, my carbide lamp throwing wild shadows on the tunnel walls. I tried not to think about the last time I'd been underground, but being in a mine again brought it all back. The weight of the mountain above me, the way sound travels strangely through rock, the feeling of being inside something alive and hostile. About 200 yards into the mountain, I found the first piece of equipment. A heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that costs $40 and lights up a whole room. The lens was cracked, and when I checked it, the batteries were completely dead. That was strange. High-quality flashlights don't just die, especially not new ones. I was starting to get a bad feeling about this rescue. The deeper I went into Blackwater Mine, the more wrong everything felt. I'd been in dozens of abandoned mines during my years as a ranger, checking for hazards and marking dangerous areas. They all had a similar feel. Empty. Dead. Like walking through the skeleton of something that used to be alive. But Blackwater was different. It felt like something was still living down there, something that didn't want visitors. The tunnel system was more extensive than I remembered from the old mining maps. Side passages branched off the main shaft every 100 yards or so, some of them natural cave formations that the miners had connected to their operation. The coal company had been thorough. They'd followed every vein they could find, carving out a maze of tunnels that went deep into the mountain's heart. Jan, my father, had worked these very tunnels. I could picture him down here with his crew, setting charges and hauling out cart after cart of coal. He'd been proud of his work, proud to be providing fuel for the steel mills and power plants. "Coal built America," he used to tell me, "and coal will keep her running long after we're gone." He never expected coal to kill him. About half a mile in, I started hearing things. At first, I thought it was just the wind echoing through the tunnels, or maybe water dripping from the ceiling. But as I stopped and listened more carefully, I realized it was something else. Something that sounded almost like singing. It was very faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the mine. I couldn't make out words, but there was definitely a melody. Slow, sad, and strangely beautiful. It reminded me of the hymns my grandmother used to sing, the old ones that talked about death and resurrection and finding peace in the darkness. I followed the teenager's ropes toward the sound, and that's when I found the second piece of evidence, a video camera, one of those new handheld models that cost more than most people make in a month. It was sitting on a natural ledge in the rock, positioned like someone had set it up to film something specific. The camera was still running. I could hear the quiet whir of the motor and see the little red light that meant it was recording. When I picked it up and looked through the viewfinder, I could see the tunnel stretching ahead into darkness. But there was something odd about the image. It seemed to shimmer, like I was looking at it through water. I rewound the tape and played back what the kids had recorded. For the first 10 minutes, everything looked normal. 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, making their way through the mine tunnels. They were laughing and joking, excited about their adventure. The girl, who must have been Sarah Mitchell, was doing most of the talking. "This is so cool," she said to the camera. "We're probably the first people to be down here since the mine closed. It's like we're explorers or something." One of the boys, I guess Tommy Brennan from his red hair, was more cautious. "Maybe we should head back soon. This place gives me the creeps." "Don't be such a baby," the third teenager said. "We just got here. Besides, we need at least 20 minutes of footage for the project." They kept going deeper, following the same route I was taking. But as the video continued, I noticed changes in their behavior. They stopped joking around. Their voices got quieter, and Sarah, who had been confidently leading the group, started looking over her shoulder every few steps. "Do you guys hear that?" she whispered about 15 minutes into the recording. "Hear what?" Tommy asked. "That singing. It's beautiful." The boys stopped and listened, but apparently they couldn't hear what Sarah was hearing. She kept walking toward the camera, toward the deeper tunnels, with a strange expression on her face. The last thing recorded was Sarah saying, "We have to find where it's coming from. We have to." Then the image went to static. I checked the timestamp. The recording had been made yesterday at 2:47 p.m. That meant the kids had been down here for almost 24 hours. In December, in a blizzard, that was way too long. If they were still alive, they wouldn't be for much longer. I continued following their rope system, but now I was hearing the singing too. It was getting stronger as I went deeper, and I could almost make out words. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, the kind of song that gets into your head and stays there. Despite myself, I found it comforting. It reminded me of my mother singing lullabies when I was small, of church services on Sunday mornings, of all the things that made a person feel safe and loved. But underneath that beauty was something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up and my hands shake as I worked my way along the rope. The tunnel was getting warmer as I descended, which didn't make sense. Mines should get cooler the deeper you go, not warmer. And the air was starting to smell different, less like coal dust and more like, I couldn't place it exactly, sweet but also rotten, like flowers left too long in water. About a mile into the mountain, I reached a section where the tunnel opened up into a large chamber. This was where the miners had been working when the collapse happened 12 years ago. I recognized it from the accident reports I'd read, from the diagrams the investigators had drawn. This was where my father had died. The chamber was roughly circular, maybe 60 feet across, with several tunnel entrances leading off in different directions. In the center, there was a deep pit filled with black water, probably runoff from the upper levels that had collected over the years. The teenagers' ropes ended at the edge of this pit, and that's where I found them. Tommy Brennan, Sarah Mitchell, and Jake Torres were standing waist-deep in the black water, perfectly still, staring up at the chamber ceiling. They weren't shivering, despite the fact that the water had to be freezing. They weren't talking or calling for help. They were just standing there, and they were singing. The song was the same melody I'd been hearing, but now I could understand some of the words. It wasn't English, but it wasn't any foreign language I'd ever heard either. The words seemed to bypass my ears and go straight into my brain, carrying meanings I couldn't quite grasp, but somehow understood. They were singing about going home, about rest and peace and never being hungry or cold or afraid again, about joining something bigger than themselves, something eternal and beautiful that lived deep in the earth. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing through the chamber. "Tommy! Sarah! Jake!" None of them responded. They didn't even look at me. They just kept singing, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. I tied off my rope and prepared to go into the water after them. The mine had safety regulations about entering flooded areas, but these were kids, and they needed help. As I started to lower myself toward the water, though, something strange happened. The water began to glow. It started as just a faint shimmer, like moonlight on a lake, but as I got closer, the glow got brighter, and I could see that it was coming from beneath the surface. The water wasn't just reflecting light, it was producing it, like some kind of bioluminescent algae. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the water was moving wrong. Instead of flowing downhill like water should, it was flowing upward against gravity, spiraling around the three teenagers like a liquid tornado. And in that spiraling water, I started to see shapes. Human shapes, transparent and wavering, but definitely human. Dozens of them, maybe more, all standing in the same positions as the three teenagers, all singing the same song. That's when I realized what I was looking at. The Blackwater mine disaster hadn't been an accident, and those 47 men who died 12 years ago weren't really dead. They were still here, still working, still singing in the darkness, and they wanted the teenagers to join them. More than that, they wanted me to join them too. As I stood on the edge of that glowing pit, listening to voices that should have been silent for over a decade, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. One of the voices in that ghostly choir was my father's, and he was calling my name. I stood there at the edge of that pit, my carbide lamp flickering despite having plenty of fuel, listening to my dead father's voice rise up from the black water. The sound cut through me like a knife, bringing back memories I'd spent 16 years trying to forget. "Davy," the voice whispered, using the name only my father had ever called. Me. "Davy, come home, son. Come join us down here where it's safe and warm." The three teenagers continued their singing, standing perfectly still in the glowing water. Up close, I could see their faces clearly now. Their eyes were open but unseeing, like they were looking at something beautiful that only they could perceive. Their lips moved in perfect synchronization, forming words in that strange language that seemed to speak directly to something deep in my brain. I knew I had to get them out of there, but every instinct I'd developed in my years of mining told me that going into that water would be a mistake. The way it glowed, the way it moved against gravity, the way it seemed to pulse in rhythm with the singing. Nothing about it was natural. "Tommy!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the chamber. "Sarah, Jake, you need to get out of there right now." None of them reacted. It was like they couldn't hear me at all. Or maybe they could hear me, but the singing was so much more important that my voice didn't matter. I pulled out my emergency oxygen detector, a device that could measure dangerous gases in mine air. The readings were all wrong. Instead of showing the usual mix of carbon dioxide and methane that you'd expect in an abandoned mine, the device was picking up something else entirely, something it wasn't designed to identify. The temperature was still rising. According to my thermometer, it was nearly 60 degrees in the chamber, impossible for a mine this deep in December. And the air itself felt thick, almost liquid, like breathing through syrup. I had to make a choice. I could go back to the surface, call for backup, and hope that help would arrive in time. But the storm was getting worse, and by the time anyone else made it up to the mine, the teenagers might be... Well, I didn't know what might happen to them, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be good. Or I could go into that water and try to pull them out myself. "Davy," my father's voice called again, stronger now. "You were supposed to be here with us that day. You were supposed to die with us. But you got sick, remember? You stayed home, and we went into the dark without you." The memory hit me like a physical blow. December 3rd, 1959. I'd woken up with a fever and a cough that hurt so bad I could barely breathe. My father had felt my forehead, looked worried, and told me to stay in bed. "You rest up, son," he'd said. "The mine will still be there tomorrow." But tomorrow never came for him. The collapse happened at 3:17 p.m., trapping him and 46 other miners in the deepest part of the Blackwater operation. The rescue crews worked for 6 days, but they never found any survivors. The official report said the men had died instantly when the ceiling came down. Looking at that glowing water, listening to voices that should have been silent, I was starting to think the official report had been wrong. "We've been waiting for you, Davy," another voice joined my father's. I recognized it as Bill Henderson, my father's mining partner. 12 years we've been waiting, and now you're here, and you brought friends, young friends, strong friends." I realized then that this wasn't a rescue situation. It was a trap. Whatever was living in this mine had somehow lured those teenagers down here, probably through that video camera project, and now it was using them as bait to get me. The question was, what was it? I'd heard stories from old miners about things that lived deep underground. Native Americans in this area talked about spirits that dwelt in caves and hollow places, entities that fed on human suffering and grew stronger with each death. But I'd always figured those were just stories, ways for people to make sense of the very real dangers of mining work. Now I wasn't so sure. The singing was getting louder, and I could see more shapes in the water. Dozens of transparent figures, all wearing the clothes and equipment of miners from different eras. Some looked like they were from my father's time, the 1950s. Others were dressed like miners from the 1920s and 1930s. A few looked even older, wearing clothes I couldn't identify. How long had this thing been collecting people? How many miners had it taken over the decades? "Come down, Davy," my father's voice said. "The water's warm. You'll like it down here. No more worrying about cave-ins or gas explosions. No more cold winters or hot summers. Just peace and rest and beautiful music forever." Despite everything I knew about the danger, part of me wanted to believe him. The water did look warm and inviting. The singing was so beautiful that it made my chest ache with longing, and I was tired. So tired of carrying around the guilt of surviving when my father hadn't. Tired of 16 years of wondering what would have happened if I'd gone to work that day. But then I looked at the 3 teenagers, and I remembered why I'd become a ranger in the first place. To protect people. To make sure that what happened to my father didn't happen to anyone else. I secured my rope and started lowering myself toward the water. As soon as my boots touched the surface, the singing got louder and the glow got brighter. The water felt warm, just like my father had promised. But there was something wrong with its consistency. It was too thick, too clingy, like it was trying to hold on to me. "Tommy," I said, grabbing the nearest teenager by the shoulder. "Come on, son, we need to get out of here." He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I was there. His eyes stayed fixed on something above us, and he kept singing in that strange language. I tried to pull him toward the edge of the pit, but it was like trying to move a statue. He wasn't resisting exactly, but he wouldn't move either. And the water seemed to be working against me, becoming thicker and more resistant with every step. That's when I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down and saw a hand reaching up from the depths of the pit, transparent, glowing, but undeniably real. More hands followed. and at dozens of them, all reaching for me with desperate hunger. "Join us, Davy," the voices whispered. No longer just my father and Bill Henderson, but dozens of miners, maybe hundreds. Join us in the deep dark. Join us where the coal seam runs forever and the singing never stops. The hands were pulling me down, and the water was rising, and I realized that I might have made a terrible mistake. I'd come down here to rescue 3 teenagers, but now all 4 of us might end up joining the chorus of the damned. The water reached my waist, then my chest. The singing was so loud now that I couldn't think straight. The glowing shapes pressed closer, and I could see their faces clearly. Men I'd known, miners who'd worked with my father, friends of the family who'd died in various accidents over the years, all of them looking at me with expressions of infinite sadness and terrible hunger. But strongest of all was my father, reaching out to me with both arms, his face exactly as I remembered it from the last morning I saw him alive. "Come home, son," he said. "Come home where you belong." And God help me, I almost did it. I almost let go of the rope and sank into that impossible water to join the eternal choir of the dead. The singing was so beautiful, and I was so tired of being alone, and the guilt of surviving when he hadn't was like a weight I'd been carrying for 16 years. But then something happened that changed everything. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard a new voice, female, terrified, and very much alive. "Help!" Sarah Mitchell screamed, her eyes suddenly focusing on mine. "Help us, please! It's trying to make us forget who we are!" The spell was broken. Whatever force had been controlling the teenagers had lost its grip on at least one of them, and in that moment of distraction, I had a chance. I grabbed Sarah and started pulling her toward the rope, but the water fought me every step of the way. The ghostly miners pressed closer, their hands clutching at us, trying to drag us back down into the depths. "You can't leave!" My father's voice roared, no longer loving but filled with rage. "You belong here. All of you belong here." The water began to churn and boil around us, and I heard a sound that made my soul freeze. The groaning of stressed rock, the sound that every miner learns to fear above all others. The sound that means the ceiling is about to come down. I had maybe 30 seconds to get all 4 of us out of that pit before whatever lived in the deep dark brought the whole mountain down on our heads. That's when I remembered the emergency mining charges I always carried in my equipment bag. Explosives designed to clear rock falls and create escape routes. I'd never imagined I'd use them to fight something that shouldn't exist. But as the ghostly hands reached for us and my father's voice turned from love to fury, I realized that sometimes you have to destroy something to save it, even if that something is your own past. I hauled Sarah toward the rope as the water around us turned violent, churning like it was alive and angry. The ghostly miners pressed closer, their transparent forms becoming more solid, more real. My father's face loomed largest among them, but it wasn't the kind, tired face I remembered. This was something wearing his appearance, something that had been feeding on his memory for 12 years. "Sarah, listen to me," I shouted over the rising chaos. "Grab the rope and climb. Don't look back. Don't listen to the voices. Just climb." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she was fighting against whatever force had controlled her. As she reached for the rope, Tommy and Jake started to wake up too, their eyes clearing as the entity's concentration was broken. But the thing in the water wasn't giving up without a fight. "You can't take them!" My father's voice roared, but now I could hear something else underneath it, something ancient and hungry and absolute. Like not human. "They're mine now, just like I'm mine, just like you should be mine." The water level was rising fast, much faster than any natural flooding. Soon, it would reach the tunnel entrances, cutting off our escape route, and the temperature was climbing too. What had felt pleasantly warm was now becoming uncomfortably hot. I got Sarah to the rope and pushed her toward the tunnel. "Go! Get out of here!" Then I turned back for the 2 boys. Tommy was closest, standing like a statue in water up to his chest. When I grabbed him, his eyes snapped open and focused on mine. "Where am I?" he gasped. "What happened? I was filming and then... No time!" I pushed him toward Sarah. "Climb, now!" Jake was deeper in the pit, and as I waded toward him, the ghostly miners closed in around me. Their hands felt real now, cold and desperate, clutching at my clothes and equipment. "Don't fight us, Davy," Bill Henderson's voice whispered. "Look around you. Look at what's really happening here." Despite myself, I did look, and what I saw made me understand the horrible truth. This wasn't just some random supernatural entity feeding on miners. This was something much older, much more deliberate. The walls of the chamber were carved with symbols, not mining equipment marks, but deliberate carvings that looked Native American, maybe older. And the coal seams themselves weren't natural. They'd been arranged, shaped, turned into something like a massive ritual circle. The Blackwater mine hadn't hit this thing by accident. The thing had guided the mining operation here, had influenced the decisions of engineers and foremen, had slowly drawn them deeper and deeper until they reached its home. And then it had taken them. The coal company knew, I realized aloud. They knew there was something down here. My father's ghostly form nodded sadly. Not at first, but toward the end. They net. Ew. The accidents weren't accidents, Davy. The cave-ins, the gas explosions, the equipment failures, that was all it. Feeding, growing stronger. Then why didn't they stop? Because it promised them unlimited coal, seams that would never run out, enough to make them rich forever. His voice was full of pain and regret. Greed made them stupid, and greed made us dead. I reached Jake and shook him hard. His eyes opened, confused and frightened. "The singing," he mumbled. "It was so beautiful. I didn't want it to stop." "It has to stop," I said, pulling him toward the rope. "All of it has to stop." But as we moved, the entity's rage grew stronger. The water boiled around us, and I could hear the mountain itself groaning overhead. Rocks started falling from the ceiling, small ones at first, then larger. "If I can't have you," the thing spoke through dozens of ghostly voices, "then no one can have you." The whole chamber shook, and I knew what was happening. The entity was going to cause another collapse, just like in 1959. It would rather kill us all than let us escape. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I pulled out the emergency mining charges from my equipment bag. 3 small but powerful explosive devices designed to clear rock falls and create emergency exits. If I placed them right, I could bring down the tunnel system behind us, sealing the entity in its deep, dark home. But I'd have to stay behind to set them off manually. The timers weren't reliable enough to guarantee the teenagers would have time to escape. "Dad," I said to the ghostly figure of my father. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here with you. I'm sorry you've been trapped for 12 years. But I can't let this thing take anyone else." For a moment his face cleared and I saw the real man underneath. Not the entity's puppet, but my actual father. The man who'd raised me and taught me right from wrong. "I know, son," he said softly, "and I'm proud of you. I've been proud of you every day since you became a ranger. Every person you've saved, every life you've protected. Ed, that's my boy." Tears ran down my face as I positioned the first charge. The water was nearly up to the tunnel entrances now, and falling rocks were making the teenagers' climb treacherous. "But you don't have to stay," my father continued. "We can fight it, all of us. We've been trapped, but we're not powerless." I looked around and saw that he was right. The ghostly miners weren't all under the entity's control anymore. Some of them, maybe a dozen, were standing with my father, their faces clear and determined. "We can hold it," Bill Henderson said. "Long enough for you to get those kids out and seal this place forever. But what about you? What happens to you?" My father smiled, the same gentle smile I remembered from childhood. "We get to rest, Davy. Finally, after all these years, we get to rest." The entity's fury was incredible now. The water thrashed and boiled, and the temperature climbed toward unbearable. More rocks fell, and I could see cracks spreading across the chamber ceiling. "Go!" my father shouted. "We'll hold it as long as we can." I started climbing, the explosive charges secured to my belt with timer fuses set for 3 minutes. Below me, I could see the ghostly miners forming a protective circle around the pit, holding back the entity's rage through sheer force of will. Tommy, Sarah, and Jake were already out of the chamber, climbing through the main tunnel toward the surface. I followed them as fast as I could, the mountains shaking around us, rocks falling like rain. Behind us, I could hear the battle raging, the entity's inhuman shriek of rage, the determined voices of dead miners refusing to let it feed again. And underneath it all, my father's steady voice calling out instructions like he was still a shift foreman organizing his crew. 2 minutes left on the timers. We reached the main tunnel and ran. The teenagers were exhausted and confused, but they kept moving. Behind us, the explosions would seal every entrance to the deep chambers, trapping the entity in its stone prison. 1 minute left. We reached the mine entrance and burst out into the blizzard. The clean, cold air hit us like a physical blow after the thick, heated atmosphere of the deep chambers. I pushed the teenagers toward their truck, then turned back to look at the mine entrance. 30 seconds. Deep underground, I could still hear my father's voice, faint but clear. "I love you, son. Take care of yourself." The explosions came like thunder from the heart of the mountain. The ground shook, snow cascaded from the trees, and the mine entrance collapsed completely, sealing itself under tons of rock and concrete. In the sudden silence that followed, I couldn't hear the singing anymore. For the first time in 16 years, the mountain was quiet. The teenagers were hospitalized for observation, but physically, they were fine. Sarah remembered more than the boys did. She talked about beautiful music and feeling like she was part of something bigger than herself. Tommy and Jake claimed they couldn't remember anything after entering the mine, which was probably for the best. The official report listed it as a successful rescue operation complicated by unstable geological conditions. The mine entrance was declared permanently sealed due to structural damage from the blizzard. No one questioned why I'd been carrying mining explosives on a rescue mission. 3 weeks later, I submitted my resignation to the Forest Service. I told them I wanted to retire early, maybe move somewhere warm. What I didn't tell them was that I couldn't stand being around mountains anymore, couldn't handle the thought of all that rock and darkness pressing down above me. I moved to Pensacola, Florida, bought a little house 3 blocks from the beach, and got a job as a fishing guide. The work was simple and clean, just me, the tourists, and the open water. No tunnels, no caves, no deep, dark places where things that shouldn't exist could hide. And wait! But even in Florida, even with the sun and the warm salt air, I couldn't completely escape what had happened at Blackwater. Sometimes, late at night when the wind was just right, I'd hear faint music drifting in through my windows. Not the entity's hypnotic singing, but something else, work songs, the kind miners used to sing to keep time while they dug. And once, just once, I swear I heard my father's voice humming along. I took that as a good sign. It meant he was really at rest now, really free. The Blackwater area was declared geologically unstable and permanently off-limits. The county put up warning signs and chain-link fences, though I doubted anyone would want to go there anyway. There's something about places where bad things happened. They carry a feeling with them, a weight that sensitive people can pick up on. Sarah Mitchell sent me a Christmas card that first year. She was doing well, she said, planning to go to college and study geology. She wanted to understand what had happened to them in the mine, wanted to make sure nothing like it ever happened again. I wrote back and encouraged her, though I didn't tell her that some things are better left unstudied. Tommy Brennan and Jake Torres both graduated high school that spring and moved away from West Virginia as soon as they could. I heard through mutual friends that neither of them could stand being underground anymore, not even in basements or subway tunnels. They'd found good lives in places with lots of open sky. I understood that feeling perfectly. 5 years later, I got a call from Sheriff Coleman. He was retiring, he said, and wanted to thank me again for what I'd done at Blackwater. But there was something else, something that made his voice sound worried. "Dave, I know this might sound crazy, but we've been getting reports from people who live near the old mine site. They say they hear music sometimes coming from underground. Not scary music, just work songs, like the old miners used to sing." I wasn't surprised. "What kind of reports, Sheriff?" "Nothing harmful. Actually, folks say it's kind of comforting, like having friendly ghosts around. But I wanted you to know, in case you ever come back to visit." I never did go back to visit. But knowing that my father and his friends were still there, still watching over the mountain, gave me a peace I hadn't expected to find. The entity was gone. I was sure of that. The explosion had sealed it away permanently, cut off from the surface world where it could never again lure the living into its trap. But the miners who'd sacrificed themselves to contain it, they'd earned the right to stay, to keep watch, to make sure that particular darkness never escaped again. Years passed. I got good at my new life, good at being a simple fishing guide who helped tourists catch redfish and snapper. I stopped having nightmares about dark tunnels and glowing water. I even started dating a nice woman named Carol who ran a bait shop near the marina. But I never forgot the lesson I'd learned in the deep chambers of Blackwater Mine. Some hungers are too old and too terrible to be reasoned with. They can only be contained, sealed away, watched over by those brave enough to stand guard in the darkness. And sometimes, when I'm out on the Gulf of Mexico with a boat full of happy tourists, when the sun is shining and the water is clear blue all the way to the horizon, I still hear my father's voice on the wind. Not calling me home to join him in the deep dark. Just telling me he's proud of the man I became. Just letting me know that some guardians never really leave their posts. And that's enough. After all these years, that's finally enough.